I always do, and I appreciate those that work with these children. If you're a visitor this morning, we really are glad to have you. Some of you I know, some of you I were introduced to, and we're just really glad to have all of our visitors. And then we have some visitors that's almost members. I mean, they've been coming real regular now, and I'm really glad to have Evan's mother and her friend from all the way from Arlington, Texas. Boy, I'll tell you what, that's a long ways to drive just to hear me preach, but I'll do the best I can. And I'm really glad to see Miss Combs. Hadn't seen her for years. Used to be a neighbor, and we went to Broadway together, and I grew up with her children, and we're really glad to have you. And we're glad to have all of our visitors. If I don't know your name, I probably never remember it. I'm real bad with names, but I want you to know that we are glad that you're here. We're glad that everybody's here. Well, I hope everyone had a good Christmas. I hope everybody had a good Christmas. We have a family tradition at our house. Every Christmas Eve, all the kids come and they bring their bedrolls and whatever, and then they all camp out on the floor and stay all night, and then the next morning while we open our presents and you know, when they eat candy and whatever we got to eat and eggnog and that kind of stuff. And now one reason everybody does that, we'd love to open them on Christmas Eve, but Shannon always holds out. It's her tradition that you open it on Christmas morning. She won't let you open nothing on Christmas Eve, and so everybody makes a bedroll down on the floor and stays all night, and makes the rest of us mad, but she holds out. She stands firm. But for some reason this year, the kids all came out, and here come Danny carrying the bedrolls in, you know, and plopping them down, and boy, we're going to have a big old time, you know. But Shannon said, well, let's just open them Christmas Eve. Boy, I mean, tell you, they tore into that stuff, you know, and the wrapping paper looked like confetti, you know, when they throw it out windows. I mean, it's going everywhere. And I mean, 5 minutes after the dust settled, they're all gone. I mean, they picked up their bedrolls, they got their stuff, out the door they went. Just left two old people sitting there with all that eggnog to drink. We ain't going to do that anymore, guys. Like a bunch of quail, you know, you thought you fired a shot. They just gone. You know, they got their stuff. You know, and it really makes you realize that people don't necessarily love you. You know, they just want the stuff. You know, and once they get the stuff, they're gone. You know, so next year we're going to be camping out on the living room floor because we're not opening any more Christmas presents till Christmas morning. That way I get to keep the kids and the grandkids there. But we really had a real good Christmas. We just, other than Mother was in the hospital. But Mother's doing better. She came home last night, and I spent the night with her, and she's doing pretty good. And I'll be staying with her next few nights till she gains a little strength in her legs, because she's been in bed for over a week, and her legs are a little bit weak. So keep praying for her. She appreciates that. And I want to read this card that the church got for me. I really like this, and I really do appreciate this. It says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua 24:15 is the verse. And it says, in loving dedication, you've set your life apart to serve the Lord and teach His Word with an ever-faithful heart. And may His richest blessings come to you day by day as devotedly you do His work and follow in His way. And I really appreciate that. I want to thank the church for that. And it's sure been my pleasure to be your pastor for another year. And I hope when I'm 85 years old, if the Lord hasn't returned, I'll be standing up there like this, still preaching to you. Everybody out there be there with the ear trumpets trying to hear me, because but I don't care. I don't ever plan to retire. I just don't want to. I just can't imagine not preaching. You know, I don't fault preachers that retire. I know a lot of them have to because of health or whatever, but I hope to just be able to just keep on preaching. I love to preach the Word. Years ago, how many remember the days of radio? Now, by the days of radio, I'm talking about back when they used to have radio programs on. I used to love those radio programs. In fact, they were better than television because you could make the characters all look exactly like you wanted them to look in your mind, and they'd have the sound effects, and boy, you could, and not only that, you could do something else at the same time, like do your homework. You know, now you know why I didn't hardly get through school. You know, I was listening to the radio programs. But I remember they used to have Fibber McGee and Molly and Amos and Andy and Dagwood and Blondie and all those programs on. But I remember one program that I really liked. It used to be on years ago, and it was not Amos and Andy, but it was Lum and Abner. How many remember Lum and Abner? Any of you remember Lum and Abner? Well, you see, a lot of those programs they put on back then were dated. By that, I mean the programs they put on back then, a lot of them were funny then, but they're not funny now because they're just old jokes. They're jokes that they used, they were new jokes then, and they were very funny, and because some time ago they aired on the radio some of those old programs, and you'd listen to them, and I think, man, those were corny. I can't believe we laughed at those. But you see, there was one program, and I believe the men were almost geniuses, and that was Lum and Abner. Their programs are just as funny today as they were then, because they weren't geared on just written jokes, but they dealt with human nature. And human nature, folks, has not changed. And even though those programs aired way back in the 40s, and they described the people that lived there in Pine Ridge back then, and some of the things that they did back then, people have the same characteristics today. And I remember one time Lum was going to do something, and Abner said, well, Lum, you just don't realize you're getting any older. He said, how long has it been since you've looked in the mirror? You know, and that's kind of the way it is. It seems like everybody else gets older, but we don't seem to get any older. And Lum said, well, that old mirror I got, you can't tell nothing by that. He said, you look in it one way, and he said, you look this way, and you look the other way, and you're all lantern-jawed. And, you know, well, we've all had mirrors like that, you know, where they was distorted. We couldn't see what we looked like. But their humor was based on human nature. And Lum would be so proud, and he was always wanting to be a big shot. And their humor stayed relevant even today. I know a few years ago they aired them again on the radio, Lum and Abner programs. And they were still just as funny. But you see, a lot of people today think we need a new Bible. But folks, I want to tell you something. This Bible is just as relevant today as it was when it was written. Because you see, the Bible deals with human nature. And when you read the pages of this book, you would think that he was talking to people right now today. Because people haven't changed, and he is talking to people today. This is not time dated. It isn't something that happened to people back then that isn't still going on today. People have the same problems, the same sins, the same coldness of heart that they had way back then 5,000 years ago. And I was reading in the book of Jeremiah. Turn, if you will, to the book of Jeremiah. And I'm going to be doing quite a bit of reading. And I remember, of course I remember. I've got a terrible memory. But I do remember that I used to be in the store business. My memory's not that bad. Although it is getting awful bad, my wife and I were home the other night, and she was looking for a box or something to wrap a present, and she went out there, and she come back in with a present already wrapped for Kathy. And we'd already got her something, give it to her, my secretary, and here's a package for Kathy. And I said, well, Susie, where'd that come from? She said, well, I don't have any idea, but it says to Kathy on it. Well, boy, it was fun opening that because we had no idea what was in it. And we opened it up and we thought, well, isn't this cute? It was a couple of Christmas towels and a cookbook, and we didn't have any idea who wrapped it or why. I kind of knew it wasn't me because I can't write that plain. She must have addressed it. We didn't remember anything about it, and we was telling Kathy about it. She said, oh, that was what Jerry was going to give me last year, and he forgot. Well, Kathy, we really enjoyed the Christmas towels and the cookbook. And we don't even remember doing it. We don't remember doing that, but we did it. Nice towels. I want you to know you would have got a lovely Christmas present if I'd remembered to give it to you. But I do remember being in the store business. When I said I remember, of course I remember that. You don't forget that many years out of your life. But when I was in the store business, I had a grocery store for quite a while there, and then I eventually had a meat market, just a meat market. But anyway, the last of the year, we always took inventory. I know a lot of the merchants now, they take inventory once a month or whatever. They have crews come in and take inventory. But back then, we'd take inventory once a year, and that's when we'd count everything and compute everything. And we had two reasons for that. First of all, to see if we made any money during the year, and also it had to do with our taxes. We needed inventory so that we would know how much taxes to pay. And I think this sermon, since it's the last of the year, the last Sunday of the year, I think this is very appropriate that we study this book because, you see, every one of us needs to take inventory. Folks, it's time to take inventory. And I would like for the message from the pages of Jeremiah to speak to us. Now, one thing about taking inventory, and I remember when we were taking inventory, and I'd help my dad take inventory in the store, he wouldn't let me guess. You know what I mean? I'd always want to just, well, there's about probably 10 cans of corn. Especially little stuff like toothpicks. Oh, you know, and I don't know why, but it seemed like Dad always get in a load of, like a post-toasty box full of toothpicks just before inventory time. And some of that little bitty stuff, you know, and I think, well, there's a whole gob. You know, boy, there's a bunch of it. But no, you have to count it. Daddy was very accurate. He said, no, you count it. You count every box of toothpicks, every can of corn, whatever. Didn't want to do that, but you see, that's the only way you can really know where you stand. Because you see, here's what happens with just guessing. Well, I guess there's 10 corn there, and there's probably about 12 cans of peas. That's almost a case. And I think on post toasties, let's see, we'd count maybe 2 wide, and it probably goes back. There's about 16 boxes. See, after a little while, you just unlock the front door and look in there and say, yeah, there's about, see what I'm saying? See, we keep slipping on it. And pretty soon it gets so haphazard, you just will not take inventory. And so this morning, let's take inventory, but let's be honest with ourselves. Because you'll never know where you really stand with God unless you are honest with yourself. Let what Jeremiah says, what God says through Jeremiah, speak to your heart. Be honest with yourself. You see, it was always our goal and always our desire and our wish when we took inventory and our hope that we wound up better at the end of the year than when we started out. Everybody that's in business wants to have made a profit that year. We always hope that we were in better shape at the end of the year than we were at the first of the year. And you know, that's the way it ought to be with Christians too. At the end of every year, you should be a better Christian. At the end of every year, you should know more about the Word of God than you did at the beginning of the year. But unfortunately, it isn't always that way. Unfortunately, a lot of times we're worse off than we were when we started. And folks, it's a terrible thing to end the year at a loss. It's a terrible thing to begin a new year at a loss. So let's take spiritual inventory. Because you see, if you don't take inventory, if you don't know where you stand, you can't correct it. Does that make sense? You see, if we took inventory in the store and figured it all up and said, whoa, we lost money this year, or we didn't make near what we should have made this year, then you could say, what did we do wrong? Maybe we didn't advertise enough. Maybe we didn't keep the shelves clean. Maybe we didn't do this. See, you can set about to correct that. But if you're just going to guess and say, I believe we did as good as we did the year before, maybe a little better, you see, you'll never improve. First thing you know, you'll be in bankruptcy court, running a business that haphazardly. So let's, each of us, as we look at this, let's be honest with ourselves and say, am I slipping? If my spiritual life was a business, would I be on the verge of bankruptcy? Or am I better than I was, more fruitful than I was at the beginning of the year? And how do you want to start the new year? And you know, we're always bad about making resolutions. All of us do. The first of every year, we all make resolutions. I say we all do. Anybody here doesn't make some kind of a resolution? I know we do. My wife writes down a bunch for me. I don't have to figure out nothing. She just points out all the areas I need improvement, you know, and gives them to me and says, here, work on this. But anyway, we'll make resolutions, and normally or usually they don't last very long, do they? Even though we have good intentions, our resolutions a lot of times really don't come to much. The people that really carry out their resolutions are the people that are faithful and steadfast. It's not really how fast you move, it's the fact that you just keep moving. We've all heard that story of the tortoise and the hare, where they had the race. And boy, I mean, when they fired the gun, boy, I mean, the rabbit just took off like a shot. And I've seen a lot of Christians do that. I've seen a lot of Christians to rededicate their life, or they'll make resolutions, and man, I'm just going to tear up the world for Jesus, you know. And boy, they take off like that rabbit did. You hear somebody else like the old turtle just plodding along. But you remember the old rabbit kept getting sidetracked. Oh, well, I'm way ahead of the game. I'm just going to sit over here and rest for a while. Oh, my lands, I had the biggest shock in my life. It's 15 or 12. And I haven't started my sermon yet. But you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. You see, but the old turtle, he just kept a-plugging and kept a-plugging, kept a-plugging. The rabbit kept getting sidetracked. That wasn't part of my sermon. I was just shocked. I thought, that can't be right. So I looked at my new watch, and it's right. Come back tonight, and you'll hear what I'm going to preach on. But the old rabbit kept getting sidetracked and sidetracked, thinking everything was all right. He was still going to win the race, and we find out the tortoise won the race. Why? Because it just kept plugging. I thank God for faithful people. I don't care. Listen, it doesn't impress me how fast you start. I'm glad you start fast, but just keep going. Keep going. But the people just keep plugging. Keep plugging. Sure, they have setbacks. They feel like they're not getting anywhere. But at the end of the year, they find out they made a great advancement over a year's time. They know more about God's Word. They notice that their prayer life is more fervent, more often. They've witnessed to people, and that's what we're looking for. But let's look at Jeremiah. I'm sorry the time got away. I don't know. Archie, did you keep longer than you should have? Okay. Everybody blame Archie. When it's 1 o'clock and we're all walking out here, it's his fault. The calling of Jeremiah. Now let's notice something about the calling of Jeremiah. And you know, I'd have to say that his calling isn't really any different than anybody else's calling. Now notice how Jeremiah was called. Then the word of the Lord, this is first chapter of Jeremiah. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee. And I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. He said, Jeremiah, before you was ever born, I'd already called you and ordained you to be a prophet. Folks, I want to tell you something. God knows the beginning from the end. And I don't believe this for a minute. I don't believe that a person is born, a person is saved, and then all of a sudden God just looks down and says, I believe he'd be a good Sunday school superintendent. I think he'd be a good trustee, or he'd be a good preacher, or Archie, I believe you'd be a good song leader and teacher. God knows that before the creation of the world. I remember Roy Davis. Roy Davis was a little boy going to Garfield. And he woke up in the middle of the night, and he run in there, and he woke his mama up, and he was scared to death. And she said, What's wrong with you? And he said, Mama, God called me to preach. There he was about 10 or 11 years old, and I don't know what to do. And she said, Well, go on back to bed. She said, He wants you to preach tonight. You know, I mean, go on to bed, go to school, get your education, you know, but he thought God was going to make him go Sunday morning and preach a sermon, I guess. That was no surprise to God, it was to Roy Davis. And I can remember when I was about 13 or 14 years old and going to Broadway Baptist Church, and we used to have BTU back then. And I had a part, it was Baptist Training Union, and I had a part, and we had like a quarterly, and everybody had to give their little part. And I went to the bedroom there Sunday afternoon to study my part, and I put it up on the music stand, and boy, when I did something, it wasn't an audible voice, but it just said, You're going to preach. I went, oh man, oh, that was just horrible. I thought, where did that come from? You know, that's the last thing I wanted to do. And every once in a while, that same thing said, You're going to preach. And I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to do that. That's the last thing I wanted to do was preach. But now look at his response. And see, so many times we think that prophets, we think of Moses, Ezekiel and Daniel, and we think of David and all those patriarchs of the Old Testament as some kind of super spiritual giants that never had fears, that never had any qualms about what God wanted them to do. I mean, they just blazed the trail. Listen, they're no different than you and I. I mean, when God let Jeremiah know he was going to be a prophet, it scared him to death. Look what he said. Then said I, Oh, Lord God, behold, I cannot speak, for I'm a child. That was, whoo, you picked the wrong guy. Man, I'm not qualified to do that. I'm a fraidy cat. See? But the Lord said, and say not, I am a child, for thou shalt go to all that I shall send thee, and whatsoever I command thee, thou shalt speak. Be not afraid of their faces, for I am with thee to deliver thee, saith the Lord. Then the Lord put forth his hand and touched my mouth. And the Lord said unto me, Behold, I have put my words in thy mouth. See, I have set thee this day over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and to pull down, and to destroy and to throw down, and to build and to plant. See, God uses the weak vessels. And so many times I think when we look at people that have achieved a lot of things for God, we think, yes, but they're just especially talented. Yes, but they're just created different. No, they're not. They're people with a calling on their life, and God gave them the power to do what he called them to do. Now notice something, when he called him, he immediately gave him the message. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Jeremiah, what seest thou? And I said, I see a rod of an almond tree. All right, now what that mean? Folks, that was an alarm clock. I see an alarm clock. Because you see, the almond tree was the first tree to bud out in springtime. What God was saying here, what seest thou? He said, I see an almond tree budding. In other words, he says, here's what he's saying. It's time for Israel to wake up. It's time for them to wake up. Now, he showed him something else. And then said the Lord unto me, Thou hast well seen, for I will hasten my word to perform it. And the word of the Lord came to me second time, saying, What seest thou? And I said, I see a seething pot, and the face thereof is toward the north. Then the Lord said unto me, Out of the north an evil shall break forth upon all the inhabitants of the land. For lo, I will call all the families of the kingdoms of the north, saith the Lord. And they shall come, and they shall set every one his throne at the entering of the gates of Jerusalem, and against all the walls thereof, round about, against all the cities of Judah. You see, now Ezekiel and Daniel lived during the captivity, Babylonian captivity. But Jeremiah lived before they went into captivity. And his prophecy and his message was to go to the people and say, we're going into captivity. But God chose a man that was very tender-hearted. He was the weeping prophet, and he would deliver this horrible message to his people with tears streaming down his faces. He says, because of the sins of this nation, God is going to destroy this nation. We're going into captivity. And all the false prophets were saying, peace, peace. We're all right. Peace, peace. Oh, and the people hated him. They hated him. And God said, don't worry about it, Jeremiah. Even though they hate you, he said, I'll make you strong. I will protect you. You just preach what I tell them to preach, what I tell you to preach. Now, Jeremiah was some kind of a prophet. Oh, he was a prophet that was brokenhearted. He was a prophet that tried to resign. God, I can't stand this burden any longer, seeing my people's wickedness and knowing that they're going into captivity. And he said, I resign. And God said, and then he said, I said I'd speak no more in the name of the Lord. But he said, I found a fire in my bones and I just couldn't stay. Folks, I want to tell you something. If God ever calls you to preach, you got to preach. I've had young men ask me before about that. They say, well, I think I've been called to preach. I said, don't do it if you can get out of it. Because, folks, if you've been called to preach, you can't get out of it. I mean, there's a message there that you've got to deliver. You've got to deliver. And so he delivered the message. Now, look, now notice of what had happened. Look at the abomination of that nation. Look at chapter 2. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Go and cry in the ears of Jerusalem, saying, Thus saith the Lord, I remember thee. The kindness of thy youth, the love of thine espousals, whence thou wentest after me in the wilderness, in a land that was not sown. He said, I remember when I brought you out of Egypt. Oh, you were so dear to me. You was just a small little nation, and you looked to me for protection. And he said, I just spread my wings like an eagle's wings over you, and I blessed you, and I protected you, and brought you into this land that flows with milk and honey. But here's the amazing thing. God said, I remember. You know, I really believe this. Now, I'm this way. I'm very nostalgic. I can think of things that happened in the past, the good times that happened in the past, and I get tears in my eyes. And some people think I'm nuts because I'm so nostalgic. But I believe God's nostalgic. God said, I remember. Folks, listen, we're the ones that need to remember. We need to remember all the blessings that God has given us. We remember all the times that God's delivered us when we were sick and we prayed and He healed us. We need to remember those things. But God says, I remember. See, they didn't remember, but God said, I remember. I remember when you were just a weak, defenseless little nation. And oh, how you loved me. Oh, how you served me. How you worshiped me. Oh, we had this love affair. We had this love affair. And oh, I would feed you with manna, and I'd guide you by a pillar of fire at night and a cloud by day. I remember those things. I remember when I brought you into your promised land, and I drove the enemy out before you, and oh, how you such a... He said, listen, you turn from me. As soon as I brought you into your land, and I blessed you and gave you that land, you begin to build idols, and you turn from me. Now notice what he says. I was going to do a lot more reading, but because of time... Wherefore, look at verse 9, wherefore I will yet plead with you, saith the Lord, and with your children's children will I plead. Aren't you glad God doesn't give up? God doesn't give up. After He blessed them so, He said, I'll still plead with you, and I'll plead with your children's children. He said, for pass over the isles of Chittim and see, and send into Kedar, and consider diligently, and see if there be such a thing. He says, just go all over the world and see if this has happened anywhere else. Hath the nation changed their gods, which are no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which doth not profit. He says, search the world over, and you won't find any nation that has traded one idol for another idol. But yet you people have the true and living God, and you have traded me for idols. And there's no profit. Idols that can't help you. Now look what he says. Be astonished, O ye heavens, at this, and be horribly afraid. Be ye very desolate, saith the Lord. I have never heard of such a thing, that people would trade the living God for idols. And I know what most of us are probably thinking. Aren't those people something else? After God has blessed them the way He's blessed them, that they do something like that. Why, I'm glad we're not idolaters. We'd never do something like that. Oh, yes, we would. And oh, yes, we do. Folks, I want to tell you something. An idol is anything that you put before the true and living God. One thing that scares me to death is see a mother or father put their children before God. Oh, mamas, don't worship your children. Love them, but don't worship them. God said, I'll have no other gods before me. That's dangerous to worship your children. Now notice this. For my people have committed two evils. He said there's two things that they've done. I want to say right now, I'm going to preach the remainder of this sermon tonight. And I hope you come back to hear the conclusion of it, because all I'm going to get to do this morning is just lay the foundation for it. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed them out cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. Why would anybody want old stagnant water anyway, even if the cisterns work? You see, cisterns were holes that were dug in the ground that would catch rainwater. And over a period of time, why maggots and worms and different things would grow in that old cistern. But he said, you have forsaken the fresh, living water, the artesian well that's fresh and it's always there, and you've dug you a cistern that don't even hold any water. People say, well, I would never do anything like that. Oh, people do it all the time. People do it all the time. Now, let me tell you something about hobbies. And first of all, I want to say this. There's nothing wrong with a hobby. There's nothing wrong with golf, Jess. There's nothing wrong with deer hunting. There's nothing wrong with fishing. There's nothing wrong with learning a musical instrument. There's nothing wrong with a hobby. But even if it's just a hobby, did you ever realize how it really doesn't satisfy? It's a broken cistern. You think it will, but it really doesn't. I remember when I was a small child, I wanted to learn to play the guitar. So my daddy bought me a Stella guitar for $5. Now the neck was so bowed on it, you could shot arrows with it, you know. I mean, you couldn't play up on the neck. Forget that. It stood off about like that. But I went and bought me, down at Leake's Music Store, an Ernest Tubb songbook. And it had some guitar chords in it. I was about 12 years old, and I remember the first song I learned, it was Yesterday's Tears by Ernest Tubb. I can even sing it for you if I wanted to. Right after church, you want me to sing it? I'll sing it out there for you. But it had 2 chords in there, and the 2 chords was D and A7. And I would play that thing till my fingers would bleed. I'm not kidding you, they would bleed because the strings were so hard to push down. But oh, I wanted to learn to play that thing. And boy, yesterday's tears are still falling. Boy, and I'd play that, and then I'd change that in 7. And I'd done that for about a week, you know, and oh, man, I love that. Man, I can play this here guitar. You know, and then I flipped over, and he had another one. I'm walking the floor over you. Oh, it's got 3 chords. Lord, if I could just learn that song with 3 chords, that's all I'd ever want. That's all, man, I have arrived if I can learn 3 chords. So, boy, I went to work on it, and I learned that song with 3 chords. C, F, and G7. Oh, man, walking the floor. Now, can you see a 12-year-old kid trying to sound like Ernest Tubbs? First of all, my voice, it's just flopping everywhere. You know, when you're about that age, you go, you know, I should have been Jimmy Rogers because I could really yodel back then. My voice was changing, you know. But, man, I'd play those 3 chords. If I can get these 3 chords down, that's it. I have arrived. I can put my guitar up, and I can announce to Chet Atkins and the whole world I am now a guitarist. Do you know what happened? I learned those 3 chords, but guess what? Oh, that ain't enough. I thought it was. No, that ain't enough. I got to learn the rest of these songs, and guess what? They got a 4th chord that you can throw in there if you know the right song. See, you never get there. It's a broken cistern. I really believe with all my heart, good as Chet Atkins is, he's still wanting to learn something new. How many people here are fishermen? Okay. Did you ever go and just catch a whole boatload? This man has. It's a little boat, but he caught a whole boatload. No. Yeah, boy, I used to, you know, I'd go fishing. I bought me one of them big old, called Sea Shark with a 90-horse Mercury engine. I'd go fishing. I wouldn't catch much. Maybe, boy, I'd come home, maybe 3 little old fish, you know. One time I went, and I mean, I hit it just right. It was under that 64 dam up there. I tied my boat up, and I'll tell you, I caught fish like you wouldn't believe. I run out of minnows. The guy was leaving. He gave me some of his minnows. I was worming dead minnows on there. And it got to the point, I'd try to see if I could let that line all the way at the bottom without something grabbing it. And I couldn't. I mean, I caught fish like you wouldn't believe. We had a great big old ice chest plumb full of fish when we went home that day. Listen, that was a perfect fishing trip. I didn't need to ever go back again because that was it. That was perfect, right? Guess where I was 6 o'clock the next morning? Right back out there. Why? You're never satisfied. I don't care how big a bass you catch. I don't care how many you catch. It'll never be enough. There's people that go deer hunting, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they always want a buck with a little bigger horns on it. See, they're never satisfied. I was talking to Wayne. He went deer hunting. He said, oh, I could have shot some. Why didn't you? They didn't have a big enough rack. See, he didn't go after the meat. See, but you're never satisfied. Now, it's okay as a hobby because we realize that you're never going to be satisfied. I don't care if you're a painter. I don't care what you are. You're never going to be satisfied to say, that's it. That's the masterpiece. I'm through. I'll never paint another one. It just doesn't come to that. But you see, here's where the sin comes in. He says, they have forsaken me, the true living God, and the fountains of living water, and have hewn out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. You see, there's people out there today that have forsaken God. And they're pursuing their life in such a way it's just a broken cistern. All summer long, people go to the lake, the same places. You think they're happy? No. They keep going to the same old dry cistern, and they're not finding satisfaction. They're still pursuing that deer, or they want to learn one more guitar chord. They've forsaken the true and living God. And that's what he says people have done. They've turned from me, the fountains of living water. And they've hewed out cisterns, broken cisterns. There's no satisfaction in it. And I want to tell you something. Did you ever see a millionaire said that's enough? No. If they got 1 million, they want 2. You never get enough. It's a broken cistern. It all runs out. You see, you might be satisfied just for an instant, and then it runs right through your fingers. Well, I've got 1 million, but I thought that would make me happy, but it didn't. Maybe 2 million would. So they go after 2 million. 2 million. Well, I'm still just as empty as I was. Now, I'm going to stop now. I haven't even got to my text. I haven't got to my text. I was leading up to my text, so please come back tonight. But take inventory this morning. Do you know what? If your life is empty, if you're miserable, let me put it this way. If you have to have something special going on before you're happy or before you have any joy, it's because you're drinking out of broken cisterns. If you're always waiting for something, see, a lot of people are just waiting for retirement. Oh, I'm miserable now, but boy, in 3 more years, I can retire. Man, then I'm going to be happy. No, you won't. That's a broken cistern. You see, it's just something you think is going to happen. It never happens. It's like the calendar I saw one time of a little boy in a little cart, and he had a goat tied up to that cart. And he had like a fishing pole. It was a cane pole with a string on it and a carrot at the end of the string. And he'd hold that string and that carrot right in front of that goat's nose, and he'd just go wherever he wanted him to, trying to get that carrot. This way Satan does. Oh, he'll promise you. He'll promise you this. Listen, there's a lot of Christians not in church this morning. Do you know why? They're trying to find fulfillment in broken cisterns. They're not happy. They're not happy. They think this, they think that, they think a better golf score, they think a better bowling score, whatever. Folks, it's a broken system. Do you think if somebody ever bowled a perfect game, they'd quit and sell their shoes? No. They'd want to see if they could do it again, and again, and again, and again. They'd want to see if they'd be the best there was in the world. And then when they was the best in the world, what then? There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. They find out, I'm just as miserable as I was. It's a broken system. If your life is meaningless, if it's empty, you say, Jerry, I know I'm saved. Well, you may be saved, but still you can be miserable. I believe the most miserable people in the world are Christians that's drinking out of broken cisterns, that have traded their God for a broken cistern. They're always thirsty, always looking for something. They're looking for something that will fill that void. If that's your case, why don't you come and drink from the fountains of the living water once again? Only Jesus can quench your thirst. Only Jesus can give you the joy you're looking for. And he says in Jeremiah, he'll do that. He said, I'll do that. See, he's just waiting on you. Someone said one time, if you don't feel as close to God as you used to, guess who moved? It wasn't God, it was you. But the world has a way of catching your attention, the grip, that switch. And man, he'd really catch it. And his big brother told him one time, said, now next time Mama whips you, said, don't stay out there on the end of her hand, get just as close to her as you can. Well, when he would, she couldn't switch him. See, it wouldn't hurt, you know. Folks, listen, when God's getting ready to switch you, get just as close to him as you can. He don't want to switch you. He wants to bless you. But he wants you to wake up. Can't you see the almond? That's the alarm clock. Wake up. Examine your heart. Have you drifted from God? Does this fit you? Has hobbies or whatever become your God? Has your children become your God? Has your job become your God? Your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, have they become your God? Have they crowded God out of your life? Have you traded the true and living God for something that is no God? If that's the case, then come back. And if you're not saved, you don't know what I'm talking about, but do you know what? He wants to save you. He's not willing that any should perish. That doesn't please God to send sinners to hell. That doesn't please God. That's the reason He's so long-suffering. He gives you all the time that He can. But judgment's coming, even though it's strange work. You see, because God is righteous. God is just. Sin must be judged. Now, it was judged on Calvary. His Son paid your sin debt. But if you won't accept him as paying your sin debt, then you must be judged. And Jesus said this, if these things happen in the green tree, what shall be done in the dry? In other words, if God allowed his only begotten Son to suffer as he suffered there on Calvary, what do you think is going to happen to the sinner? Let's stand.